Hello. Texture paint is a quick way to get some texture onto your surface and to provide some sort of details which are very helpful in seeing the character in its eventual kind of environment and some of the things that it will do. So it can be a bit useful to have some places marked out on the surface of the object, whether it's deforming or not deforming. And when it's deforming, you get a chance to sort of prefigure some of the joint areas, like maybe with some creases, and you get to do it in a way that's kind of quite intuitive. There's a few downsides to the process, which I'll talk about presently, but the thing about texture paint is it allows you to pre-visualize large coloured areas of your character or whatever the object is. Before you get down to texture paint, however, there's a couple of things you need to be clear on. One is that you have no modifiers ready to apply. So at this point the mesh is finished. There are no more additions or subtractions to be done on this mesh, and you can get away with moving some things around slightly, but obviously nothing will cross over anything else. So that, let's say the mesh is fully finished at this point. Now, a bit of texture paint will mean that you can kind of postpone some of the more detailed texture work. For instance, if you're animating with this, you could go ahead and get on with the animation, and it wouldn't mean any kind of ill formation in the process. So it will be completely sensible to go about a little bit of texture painting just to block out some major areas. So where we are at the moment is the character standing on the what I'm going to call the floor, which is the world origin point, and it's posed ready to get a skeleton in. And none of what follows here relates to animation at all. It's really just about time to get some texture on the surface and give it a little bit more kind of life. Okay, so before you start with texture paint, you don't go straight to texture paint, you go to UV editing. Okay, so the UV editing is something that is ultimately useful anyway, but it's required before you do any texture paint. The reason for that is it's very easy to have overlapping UV areas, which means one dab of paint on a shoulder can turn up also the same colour somewhere else on the figure, and it makes no sense to have a texture paint on an object that hasn't been properly unwrapped. So that would be the next process. So we go to edit mode, and we don't need to spend a long time on this at all. We'll go to face mode and A on the keyboard to select all of the face of the object. So this is the mess I've currently got for my UV layout, but all we need to do is go to UV, unwrap, Smart UV project, and leave the settings to default. I think I may have changed one of these settings, but nothing major. So this is what you get. Now, if you're going to do the whole of the texturing by just hand painting in these islands, then this might be a bit challenging without some kind of kickstart. So this is where texture paint can really help, blocking out key areas, not necessarily in the colours they're going to have ultimately, or the base colours for those even, but just blocking them out into different defined areas so you can see what's shoulders, arms, torso, legs, shoes, etc., etc., because some of these islands are pretty small, and it's hard to know actually what they are. So if you've got a high resolution model, it's kind of almost impossible to see what the clusters are, because they're just so dense with stuff, and certainly from a distance it's not always that easy. I mean, that's a giveaway for kneecap and side of shoe, but the rest of it isn't not going to be quite so easy. Okay, so I've got my UV layout done, and that's all I needed to do there, really. If you're feeling a bit antsy about things, then it's probably a good idea to save it. The UV layout goes with the model. Wherever the model file goes, that's what goes there. So any texture you generate is on the basis of a UV layout that obviously you need to go or keep with the model. It's a better idea if you want to do different versions of a UV layout and maximize some things, or maybe do some hand treatment of some areas, especially around the head. You might want to stitch some things together just to reduce the amount of seams. But texture paint doesn't worry about seams. So texture paint gives you very much seamless painting. Okay, so let's crack on. So we're going to go to texture paint, and our figure is in purple, and this is kind of like its acceptance attitude for texture painting, is this purple colour. It's also quite a good colour to block out your model. But let's move to viewport shading so we can see actually what texture it will be painted with. And there's a couple of ways around doing this, but this is the kind of obvious way. Right, we want to get painting, so we've got a kind of brush effect, but we're not having any result. We're painting with this sort of muddy brown colour, but we're not seeing anything, and that's because we haven't defined texture slot yet. So we're going to go to texture slot. We're going to go to there's two modes, single image or material. We're going to use material, and we're going to choose a particular slot, which is generally going to be the base colour. You can see, however, if you needed to paint metallic effects, then you could create another slot for the metallic, and if you wanted to do bump as well, you could paint in a bump area, but that would be kind of very much hand and eye coordination and kind of colour knowledge to do that, and maybe not the best place to do bump painting for reasons which might become clear later. So I've got texture slots, base colour, and it says here its name is crude base colour. My character's called Crude, by the way. It's probably not a bad idea to keep some reference to what it is. This, for those of you working into a game engine, this is a good number in terms of acceptance or the standards, but in terms of levels of detail and kind of the result you'll get in texture paint, we need to bump that up somewhat. So we're going to go 4096, and the same again in the other field, which is obviously kind of 4 times the dimensions of pixel, but therefore 16 times what the previous setting was in amount of pixels. Okay, so we're going to leave the other settings except for this one, and this is going to be my kind of get rid of me colour. It's going to be deliberately colour that pleads to be painted out with something or other. Zoom that up a bit. So you'll find a kind of difference in what you thought you were getting from when you set colours to what it looks like on the model. So we're going to go add, and there we see it. And now if we look over here, we have our texture paint window with UV layout on it. We can see where on the mesh we will be painting if we were painting over here, and you can paint on both, it doesn't matter. So let's get started. I've got this colour here which I'm not strictly keen on, so I'm just going to bump that up a bit. You get used to kind of things looking a bit darker than you presumed after a while. I just bump the saturation up around the wheel there and start to paint. Oh, but before you start, a bit of setup to do. Now, reduce the strength down because your first bit of painting is going to be a little bit, what's the word? And probably this is what you'll find in terms of the the settings that you will find when you first go to texture paint. So I've got this set of menu items up here, and I can shrink this down to reduce that down to nothing to get a bit more menu, and anything's missing I'll just scroll a bit. By the way, this doesn't reflect my use of the scroll wheel unless it's clicked. So what do I want? I want to have a look at the fall off shape. So fall off shape is useful because you're going to end up with a kind of gradated edge if you use this sort of fall off profile. You can have a kind of very even thing, and this is quite good if you're working with probably if you're working with bump mapping by hand painting, then that's probably quite a good one to choose. This I think is the default. But for the moment, let's see if we can get a really nice hard edge by using this. It's like kind of like a massive fall off. There's no even visible profile because it goes right to the edge of the graph. Okay, so that's ready to use. The stroke I've chosen is space. I haven't changed it. This is the default setting. And yeah, there's a way to modify the brush size, which, keep an eye down here, I'll show you which that is. So that's the square bracket, and that's the not square bracket. That seems to be kind of applying a multiplier, but anyway. When you zoom in, the cursor stays the same size relative to the screen, not to the model, which means you can zoom in quite close to do fine detail work. So let's get painting. I'm just going to airbrush over the entire head. I'm doing it fairly coarsely because where I need to put the other colours on, then that's going to be quite what's the word? It's going to be quite carefully done. Yeah, carefully is the word. So you'll notice I've painted a bit here. It's a bit watery looking, but nothing there, which is a simple fix. So then when you start painting, it's going to start working symmetrically, so the theory goes anyway. I'm going to bump the strength up because I really want to see some colour. There we go, and as you can see it on the other hand. Now this size brush, this diameter brush, it's going to behave in a certain way. Let's see what it says. Effect alpha? No, maybe not. We're not applying a particular texture, we're not using a mask, and the stroke is defined as space. Now the space is just like standard painting. There are other options, of course. You can do dots, so there's going to be gaps between. So it's going to work out the dots per inch setting on your mouse and do every other thing dotted, which sounds quite small. And some of these I don't quite know what they do. But line will give you allow you to start with work with a straight line and then curve. Similar sort of thing, but kind of evening out your wobbly hands ideally. So I'm just going to overgo the face now in kind of close proximity to that pink colour. It looks very kind of jaundiced yellow, so there's a bit skinned down the back here, and of course the ears. Now I've got my mirror painting on, and that's clearly. I was talking just about painting. Oh, let's see, there's a little gap in there. Now sometimes the UV layout does something a little bit unexpected. So sometimes there may be a little overlap and you get some bleed across of paint from one area on the object to somewhere quite different because they're sort of very closely packed in the UV layout. Okay, So I'm not going to work any more on this, just to demonstrate the tools really now. But one thing that is really, really useful to do is to put the eyes in. And here you might feel you need a reference image to hand for the eye that you're going to do. I've done this a few times, so I have a kind of idea of what I want to do with this. So I'm going back to this strange, slightly wishy-washy purple, and it needs to be pretty bright because of the darkening effect of the colour. Now, if I'm trying to be neat here, you can see that I'm going over areas that I want to keep as my eyelid colour. So one of the antidotes to that could be curve. Let's give that a go. So I'm going to undo that and go to the stroke setting, and let's try curve, see what I can do with that. Well, that's not very good. Okay, line should work better. Let's try line. So line gives you the ability to step round in lines like that, so you sort of get a bit of a handheld. Now, although we chose that 4096, you can see at this distance we are getting some jaggies. So if you choose a softer fall off and then a smaller brush, then so you have a more curved fall off profile, then you should be able to get rid of this sort of jaggy setting. So we go fall off, that one, and then we'll smallerize the brush. There's a new word for the language, and sometimes the scroll wheel doesn't provide you with quite enough control. So if I wanted to get into the corner but have a nice kind of soft edge, that works pretty well, pretty nicely actually. Okay, so now we just need to think about the eye colour, and of course don't forget I've got symmetry painting on, so I'm going to be seeing the same thing on the other side, thankfully. Okay, so I'm just going to infill, go back to regular, oops, not that one, regular spray painting, size up the brush, and then just infill there. So you get a nicer edge with a better fall off profile. So when you actually want a hard edge, the hard edge profile for the fall off, you know, the drop off one, the square profile, not very good actually. Okay, so we're going to go to here, choose our, I'm going to choose the eye colour, which is going to be sort of a grey, green, blue sort of thing, but dark. Okay, so it's going to look fairly dark, and another useful thing is size the brush up a bit more, and then maybe go in ever so slightly closer. And you always miss a kind of top bit of your eye off the underneath the eyelid, and your friendly character probably wants to have bigger eyeballs than your not nice characters. Okay, so just infill. That bit seems strangely resistant, so I wonder if that's a little gap on the mesh somewhere. Now there's a weird thing. Yeah, you get quirks like that, and you know, a better person than me will know why that's like that. Okay, and I could probably just size that up yet larger. If you want your character to look more excited, then you probably need to make a smaller eyeball so their eyes can look sort of wider, or just model it wider eyed as well. Okay, so and then just what will be the final bit of this, which is to do the dark bit in the middle. Now, all tints end up black, so there's a kind of saving of clickage. Trying to find the sweet spot between modifying the brush and zooming in. Okay, so this is going to have something of a soft edge, and I think I want to darken that colour. It's coming up somewhat bright. Now the value in this is not necessarily in getting it right here, but it does mean if we go over now to the UV layout, we can see where that's happened on the model, and there's a little kind of mesh gap that's cropped up. Now when the object was made, it was done with, as you can see, fairly large faces, but somehow there's a nibble been taken out of that one. But anyway, yeah, it's not clear why that is, but you can see therefore where things are on the mesh and on the UV layout, sorry, and so you could hand treat and get those better. So like just there's a bit of kind of overlap outside the UV layout. Okay, so that's a couple of the benefits of doing this. There's some kind of quirky things that will happen, and yeah. Now, one final thing, vitally important. A couple of final things, actually. Okay, so first thing is, let's go to our material. We've been kind of placed in the material visible thing. There's our base color, which is it's got this is the name that Blender understands for it, but it's not actually a file yet, so it's not a texture image yet, and that's the next thing to do. But before I do that, I'm just going to rename this, which I'll do here. So it's crude matte. And again, this material name is owned by the Blender file. It doesn't relate to any external file yet. And then over here, you'll see that we've got an asterisk. So this asterisk tells you that there is an image waiting to be saved. So if we do save all images, if you're looking at multiple texture slots, then that will be viable. Well, I'm just going to go to save as, because I want to make sure I get the choice of name for my file. So it's going to be called crude base color.png. It's going to be 4096 because we set that up earlier, and then here are the other kind of relevant settings. It's going to get an alpha channel, which you might find useful for some objects. For instance, you could put in a metallic in the alpha channel, so a metallic mask. For this one, I would have thought something like a bump mask would be a good sort of thing. I say bump mask, a bump material, bump texture sent in the alpha channel could be quite a good use of that file space. But if you were feeling you didn't need an alpha, or you're going to do all that stuff in a separate image file, then you go RGB. It's going to be PNG format, which works pretty well, and then save as image. Now what we'll get is not going to have these template items on, so you need to remember to save this out as a UVW template when you're in the UV editing window. So go UV edit and image, and then export UV layout, that's the one. So you aggregate these together in your image editor and work on them as a different layers, so you can use the UV template as a guide. Okay, and there's the appropriate files. So although I did that setting in the texture paint, it's carried it through into the UV editing, thankfully. Okay, so that's it for this one. Hope you found this useful. Goodbye now.